Hey guys, another project here from J&D Projects, and today we are going to be talking about how to make bolts and screws and stuff look vintage. This kind of ties in with our bellows restoration project. If y'all have not seen that, I highly recommend y'all go back and watch those videos. I think we have three parts of that right now, and we're just gonna be.
So one of the problems that we've got, and we have camera lady here today, so she's going to be doing all this. Here's a selection of bolts and nuts, and so when you're thinking about doing a period restoration, now you look at this lag bolt here, and it's got a hex head on it. Okay, these have been threads have been cut in or have been put in by machine. And so if you think about using this modern bolt to put into a piece of, into a restoration project like an 1850s bellows, it just really is out of place. And so the question is, what can we do about this? Now you can go and find some bolts that are not galvanized and bolts that have a square head instead of a hex head, because back in the day the bolts all had hex heads, or excuse me, square heads. Okay, now the question is, we don't have really good access to a lot of period hardware, so the question is, can we, like John said, make these bolts look vintage? What can we do? And so I want to talk about a little bit about the physical form, and then John's going to tell you about some chemical things we're going to do here in this video. So another issue would be like bolts. The square bolts, historical. Excuse me, square nuts, historical. Hex nuts, not so much. So what could we do there? And we may talk about that in a minute. Another thing is Phillips head screws. Didn't have them back then. What'd they have? Well, if they had anything, it would have been a round-headed, straight bladed screw. Okay, that would look something like this. But again, this screw has been galvanized. Okay, so it's going to really look out of place if we have some blackened some material, some like a hinge or something that we have forged by hand. It's going to be black, and we put that bright screw on there. It looks out of place. It's not going to look right. So what could we do to fix that? One of the things that one of the screws that we can use, we can make it, I think, an exception for, would maybe these flat-headed beveled straight screws. At least they're straight. They're not Phillips. But once again, we get over here into the carriage bolts. And once again, probably not so much historical here. But if we had to use them, we could, but we wouldn't want them to look like this. We would want them to be blackened. And so how can we do that? There's this process of galvanization. John's going to talk about that and tell you what we're going to do here in just a second.
Okay, so I guess I'm just going to get into the process of galvanization. So basically, when a bolt comes out of the factory, well, when they're done manufacturing the bolt itself, it's just going to be plain steel. After that, they are going to electroplate it with zinc and make a zinc coating to make the bolts more corrosion resistant. Here's an example of an ungalvanized screw. And the process for taking off the galvanization is soaking these pieces of hardware in muriatic acid. You can find it at general hardware stores. You'll be soaking them for maybe 30 to 45 minutes, or when it stops bubbling, because when you put it in there it starts bubbling. We'll get into more on that in a second once we do the process. So that's how the process is done.
So for instance, we'll take this bolt, this lag bolt here, which is galvanized. We're going to degalvanize it. Then we have to get rid of this hex head, because once again, remember, like I said, we want them to be square heads, not hexes. So that's going to have to come later. We're going to have to get the forge fired up for that. So while these materials are soaking, we'll get the forge fired up. Now, let's bring this over here. We're going to go on ahead and stick some acid. Now, you need to be really careful about this. Now, I'm going to tell you, wearing gloves is really important. You don't want to get this stuff on you. And if you saw one of our earlier videos, where we made these tweezers. And why did we make these tweezers? We made these tweezers so that we can pick these bolts up and stick them in the acid. Now, and over the top there, and watch it bubble. You see that? So what's happening is muriatic acid is basically a fairly dilute solution of hydrochloric acid, and the HCl reacts with the zinc to form hydrogen gas and zinc chloride. And so you shouldn't do this in a closed room. You know, it's ideally done outside. We're actually doing it in our workshop, which we have our big garage door open. But you know, ideally this should be done outside. And after we get all of these bolts in there, we are going to set this outside to let it finish working. But notice that every time we put a galvanized piece in, it starts to generate HCl. And we're just going to go on ahead and stick all of these in there. You see how useful these little simple tweezers are. There's a we'll put a link in the description for this video so you can see it if you're interested in making some of these for yourself. But until then, we're going to go on ahead and just put all of these parts in there. Now, why, John, do we want to get rid? Why would, before we forge, we want to get rid of the zinc?
Well, when you heat up a galvanized piece of metal, it gives off a poisonous gas. It just basically gives off.
Now, we're going to have to take this outside because it's really starting to smell. So we're going to take this outside, and John, you finish talking about what you're talking about.
When you heat up a piece of metal that has that's galvanized, it vaporizes the zinc coating and makes zinc vapor, which is highly deadly if you breathe it. So any sort of piece of metal that you see a shiny coating on, do not heat it up. If you are unsure, do not heat it up. If there's even a question in your mind, don't even risk it, because of course it's deadly. It can kill you very quickly. So yeah, so we're going to get back to the project.
Okay, so we're going to let these soak for a while, and then we're going to come back to you and talk about our next step, because getting the zinc off is just the first step. The second step is we got to put them in the forge and at least get them hot. In one case, we're going to actually get them forge welding hot, or forging hot, and do a little bit of work. And then in the other cases, we're just going to get them hot enough in order to blacken them, because that's the whole thing to make them look, period, is getting them blackened. And so we'll show you how to do that too. There's several different ways to do it. We'll show you the old 1800s way. See you in a minute.
Okay, yeah.
Okay guys, so we've let this sit for about an hour, and as you can see, most of the it looks like most of the zinc is off. The solution is turned kind of a yellowish green. That's the zinc chloride. There's still just a tiniest amount of bubbles coming up, but I only need to get one of these hot. So ideally we might let this thing sit for 2 or 3 hours just to make sure. But in order to show you what we want to show you, we're going to go on ahead and get started.
Okay guys, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get these things out, and I'm going to go over to our work sink and wash these off with a little bit of kind of just a generic dishwashing cleaner.
You could use some baking soda if you really wanted to neutralize it, but if you wash them good with this dilute HCl, that's more than sufficient. You really don't need the baking soda, but if you want to be on the extra safe side, you could use baking soda. Now I'm going to take and keep this because it's still good, and so we'll reuse it for another project. So we just put our spent HCl in a container. And I usually leave the lid ajar overnight and then seal it up tight the next morning. So I'm just going to leave that just so it's just on there just enough, but it's still loose. And that way, if there happens to be any gas dissolved in the what we just put in there, it can get out and not pressurize this plastic container.
Okay guys, so we're just going to get some of this cleaner on our parts. You can see it bubbles quite a bit. And we're just going to get an old toothbrush like this. Bring over here like that, and then just start scrubbing it off. Doesn't take very long, just a little scrubbing. I'm gonna wash the tweezers in the bucket as well. Some more stuff in there, a little bit of water, and that does it. So I'm just gonna do that to the rest of the parts, and we're gonna get back to you in just a second.
Okay guys, so we have here's an example of a hex bolt, lag bolt here, and what we're going to do is we're going to convert this hex into a square. It's very simple to do, and just have to have a little bit of a forge. So I'm going to stick it right in there and give some air to it, get it hot, and then we'll be right back with you as soon as it's hot. Okay. So let's see what we got here. Okay, we got a bolt that's good and hot. Let's take it over to the anvil. This is going to be a very simple. You may not be able to see it being red anymore because we're in the sun, but all we're going to do is just knock those edges off. Now, one of the downsides to this, like I said, it's not perfect, but it does get you in the ballpark. And you might be able to knock this down just a hair, if I can hold on to this. Which I think I'm going to have another pair of pliers here to get a hold of this a little bit. And let's stick it over here in the vise and see if we can make this work better here. Okay, so you can see how the top is just a little bit thick. So let's see if we can. Okay, so we went from a square, or from a hex to a square. Okay, again, it's not perfect, but it does get you in the ballpark for being able to at least get something that looks halfway period. I was kind of rough on this, so it's not exactly square, it's more rectangular. But the whole point is just knocking that down a little bit. We could probably also flatten this down a little bit more. If I do another heat, I could flatten it down a little bit. But that's the whole point of, I think you got the point of what we're doing here. Okay, so John is going to take you to the forge and do something a little bit different now.
Okay guys, so as you can see here, I have a bolt that you would have already squared off, and you're just going to be putting it on top of the fire here. You're going to let it get to around 400 degrees. It doesn't have to be super hot, but about 400 degrees, and then we're going to melt some beeswax on it, and it'll make the finish have a very nice shiny black finish to it. So we'll go into that in a second.
Okay.
Alright, so our bolt's hot, and what we're going to do is we're going to bring it out, and we're going to rub beeswax on it. Get it all over the thing. And get it nice and covered. There you go. Now let it cool, and then it'll get nice and black.
Hey guys, so we're done here. Once again, take a look at the before and after here. So there's the before in John's right hand, the after is in his left hand, and you can see very clearly now how we got square top. It's been darkened down, and now it looks much more period. Okay, and so you know, for most applications, you probably don't need to worry about this, but you know, since we're doing this restoration of this 1850s bellows, we want to try to be as period as possible. So, but this can be used for other things as well. And there are other ways to darken down. What are some other ways to darken a piece of metal down?
Blue. Oh yeah. So there is also another method. It's called bluing. You usually use it with firearms. It's usually called perma blue or super blue. Those are the ones that we use a lot. It's just a chemical that etches the surface of metal to make it look black or blue, depending on what you get and which preference you are. So which preference you have. I like this method better because it's a little more historical. So.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Because this is they would have been using beeswax or maybe even bear fat, possibly.
Bear fat, if you had a good supply of bear.
Yeah.
You
know. But certainly beeswax. That's always left over from the well, the beeswax is left over from the beekeeping and the hives and stuff. And so I'm sure, you know, they made candles with it, and if they had leftover stuff from the candle making, you could, you know, the blacksmith could use that. You know, they used everything they could and reused. They used the whole enchilada. They didn't just take a piece off of something and then throw the rest away like we do today. They used every part. You know, if you ever look, for instance, in how they butchered animals back then, you know, they used every part of the animal. They didn't let anything go to waste, and everything had a place and everything had a purpose. And you know, if an animal's going to give its life for you, then you know they wanted to get every ounce that they could get out of it, out of respect, you know, of what that animal gave for them,
and necessity,
and of necessity, right? So all good stuff. So thank y'all for being here. John, what else do we need to say before we cut this thing off?
Well, consider subscribing. That would be great.
That would be huge.
Yes. It really helps us out.
Yeah, I want to tell you, we're up to 44 subscribers now, and we have, this will be our 14th video, the one that you're seeing right now, and we have 44 subscribers. Mm-hmm. And
in 3 months with 13 videos. So we think that's pretty good. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for watching. And also on the subscribing thing, it's not like a magazine subscription. It's completely free, and you can stop the subscription whenever you want to. And hit the like button. That would help us out too.
Thanks, guys. J&D Projects out.
See ya.